The courage to be vulnerable. There's a lot of content out there about how important it is for men to be courageous, and I fully agree with this. However, I think one of the ways that we can really show courage in life is to be truly vulnerable with ourselves and with other people. Now, being vulnerable means allowing ourselves to experience the full range and the full depth of our emotions, and to not engage in the various mechanisms that we have to distract ourselves from those. So things like drinking, workaholism, simply crushing down the emotions, and like soldiering on through. All of these things, which traditionally sometimes are even celebrated in men, I would argue are not, in a way, particularly courageous. Because for me, the real courage, and not just the courage, but also the kind of solution to some of these emotional issues that we might have, lies in, first of all, just recognizing and accepting the fact that we're having these very strong emotions. Now, if you're not engaging in suppressing activities, then it's quite possible, even as a man, and there's actually, I don't believe, much difference between men and women in this, it's just cultural, but it's possible that you're going to experience some very strong emotions in life. You might experience some very strong grief, you might experience some very strong anger, you might experience some very strong greed or lust. And I think it's very important to acknowledge these feelings and to be able to hold them, be with them, simply sit still and be like, okay, that's in my body, okay? To feel that, that's the first step. And if you can do that, that means you're being vulnerable with yourself, you're being transparent, you're not denying, you're not suppressing, you're actually acknowledging that you've got this going on. And that's really the first step, and the most important step to working through if you have like an imbalance with these emotions where it's actually affecting your quality of life. You need to fully recognize that it's going on and accept it. That's vulnerability with yourself. And then being vulnerable with others. So if you want to get emotional help with this, for example, if you want to see a therapist, you're going to have to open up at some point. You're going to have to say, well, yeah, I feel very, very sad, or I'm overwhelmed with grief, or I get very angry, or this kind of stuff. So you're going to have to share these feelings. And if you're in an intimate relationship with someone, you might have to express these feelings if that's what's going on for you. And you're going to want them to do the same. So there's this kind of idea that it's almost like a stoicism that's gone too far. So stoicism's great, and that's like a whole thing in itself. But it doesn't mean suppressing or denying our emotions. And for me, the real stoicism is actually in facing the depth and intensity of the human experience and moving through it without suppressing it, without pushing it down, without denying it. So in our relationships with ourselves and our relationships with others, whether they're intimate relationships or even just friendships, or with professionals like mental health professionals, if that's what you're into, if that's what you're involved with, it's going to be really important. And like I say, for me, this is where the real courage is, because you're facing these feelings, you're embracing them, and then you're moving through them. And as you move through them, then you actually heal any emotional pain that you have, or any emotional imbalance that you have, in a way that you're not going to if you're kind of like crushing it down. You might be able to like push it down for like a few years, maybe a couple of decades or something, but it's going to affect the quality of your relationships, and you're never going to get past it. And if you have children, you probably pass on some of these unhealthy habits that you've developed to cope with your emotions. Or, not just in parent-child relationships, but just in all your relationships with other human beings, there's going to be this suppressed emotional component, and that's going to have the effect that it has. People aren't necessarily going to experience the fullness of who you are, so in a way you're denying them that kind of intimacy, if you like. But they may also be on the receiving end of like unhealthy expressions of your emotions. So I saw a video recently about, boys shouldn't cry. And this guy that was being interviewed was like, anger's fine. It's fine for a man to be angry. And he's like, he's really angry, man. And all that anger was going to have an effect on his environment. And by the way, I'm not saying anger's bad. That's not the message for this at all. But just to point out that this guy thought that anger was good, sadness bad, anger good, sadness bad. And that, men shouldn't express sadness, but it's okay to express anger. And I just think that was very silly. The point is that we have all these feelings, and some people have tendencies to go, one direction rather than another one, but it's all like emotional, intense emotional experience. And we need to be honest about this, and we need to share it with ourselves, acknowledge it to ourselves, be able to kind of hold it and be with it. And also in terms of, if you want some kind of intimacy and closeness and transparency in your kind of social environment, whatever that is, then to actually be vulnerable, which I think really is an act of courage. Thanks for watching.